We are live. I'm just checking to make sure our audience can do it.
Good evening. Call the meeting planning board for February 1st to order. I'll begin with a roll call. Alden?
Here.
Here.
Jamie?
Here.
Heather?
Here.
Richard?
Oh, sorry, I couldn't hear you. Yes, here.
Rick is here, and Beth Bilal and Don Walters are going to be present. So the first, just go quickly through the agenda. We have two public hearings on the agenda, one for Stephen J. Lewis for a special permit amendment at 2 to 6 Market Street, and one for Kenneth Woods for a special permit for nonconformities at 20 Temple Street. We also have a request for minor modification at 3 Doyle Drive. The board is going to be discussing two potential zoning changes or sets of zoning issues related to outdoor seating and the business park. And we'll have approval of minutes and any other updates from the chair or planning director. So we will begin with the 2 to 6 Market Street project.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lisa Mead, Tellerman Costa 30 Green Street on behalf of the applicant. As you might recall, we were in here 4 weeks ago seeking additional relief under the ITIF special permit ordinance because at the time we believed that we were only going to be able to provide 6 on-site parking spaces as opposed to the 11 originally permitted. And then we needed 1 additional commercial space. If you can go to the next slide, Andy. In the meantime, I just have to say a couple of things that were very important to the project happened. First of all, thanks to the zoning code enforcement officer reading our analysis of the handicap parking space requirements. She revisited that with the plans to the building inspector, who reviewed it and understood that all 15 spaces for the project were not being provided on site. And therefore, we fell under the requirements for a handicap parking space. So that requirement came off the table. In addition to that, and I'm going to talk about this in a minute, but Matt, pursuant to Mr. Coop's request and other members' requests, the architects, Matt and Scott, and the owner, Steve, contacted dozens more manufacturers and installers. And you need to know that, of course, the installer and the manufacturer both have to agree that the equipment can go in. As a result of that, they found a person from Connecticut with some equipment who came up on site and with some modifications, which we can have Matt talk about if you'd like, agreed that they could install the lifts. And so the applicant can install 5 lifts, which would accommodate 10 spaces, and then there's an at-grade space on site, which was what the original plans were. It does not change the topography of the site. There will be modifications to where the lifts actually attach to the site. And again, if you want Matt to talk about that, we have that information here, because I know some people wanted more details, but now that we know that it can happen, I don't know, that's up to you whether you want that presentation. So if you go to the next slide, so you can see this was the original approved plan. You can see where the original lifts were required, and the at-grade parking spaces up Summer Street on that side. And if you go to the next slide, this is that the next slide?
It's the next one.
Oh yeah, so if you go to the next slide, sorry.
Okay.
Oh, I forgot Matt put all the other slides in. All right, so in any event, there we go. Thank you, Andy. This is it's the same thing, it's just a schematic of the various grade differences, but now those will all be filled with lifts. And so we don't need relief for the residential units, which was part of the original permit. However, we are requesting for 1 additional ITF space for the commercial space, because the additional 400 square feet goes over the amount that we had. And so we would request that that modification occur and that you issue a ITI special permit for that additional space. And with that, I can turn it over to Matt if the board has any questions about the details of how that is happening.
So before you go there, just to clarify, so that that space with the handicap space, that's not going
No, that's not going to be there. It's going to be a lift.
But the dimensions of the space are as shown there.
That's are the dimensions. Okay, if you go to the last slide, Andy. Thank you. So there they are.
I think this is pretty simple. Do any members of the board have any specific questions about the proposed change plan? Richard, Alden, Heather, any questions around this?
Sorry, this is Richard. Only to add that this is great. We're so happy that the manufacturer was able to accommodate.
Yeah, I want to say that one of the reasons it took us so long is the efforts that Matt and Scott and Steve went through to address the issues of the board and find somebody that was as creative with them in order to make this work.
And just one other question that just to clarify again, this doesn't require any regrading of the existing concrete platform where the parking is?
Just quickly, Matt Land, Scott Farm Architect. So we're actually going to use a combination of regrading each individual spot, custom shims, and also custom drive blocks that are going to be welded to the bottom left side of each lift, essentially.
Okay, thank you.
So board members can have any other specific questions. I think we just move on to the public hearing. I'll just open it for public comment. Are there any members of the public who wish to be heard on this application?
I don't have any questions, but I think this is fantastic, and I commend them for going through so many channels to get this right.
Seeing nobody from the public, I'll close the public comment and ask the board for your preference on this. I guess the question would be, do we have a motion to, to amend the prior special permit for ITI to change it from 6 spaces to 7 spaces?
Correct.
And we could basically use the prior findings with just the modification of the numbers. And that's it. It's just a couple of modifications to the prior findings. Do board members want me to recite those, or is it simple enough? Okay. So could I have a motion then to amend the prior special permit to change the number of spaces for the ITIF from 6 to 7?
I'll make the motion. Just trying. Second.
Okay. Then I will go through the roll call. Alden.
Yes.
Yes.
Jamie.
Yes.
Heather.
Yes.
Yes.
We need this vote.
There he is.
Richard, are you with us?
I said yes.
We lost the connection with you. Thank you.
Okay, yes.
And the chair votes yes. There you go.
Thank you very much.
Rick,
Yes.
I feel like I'm either losing the connection or I'm having just a hard time hearing when it's not someone speaking at the podium. It's going in and out, I feel.
Difficulty hearing my microphone?
I don't hear like complete sentences from you. And I know that you're probably speaking in complete sentences. They're not coming through that way.
Just wave, wave your hand if you have a problem. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the request for Kenneth Woods at 20 Temple Street for a special permit for non-compliance.
Yeah, I am Ken Woods from 20 Temple Street.
Can you speak a little bit louder, please?
I'm Ken Woods from 20 Temple Street.
What do you want to make?
We have a couple of slides up from your materials. Did you want to speak to those for the board? So they have a summary of what you're looking for.
Okay, sure. Okay, that's the site plan or plan view of the whole property. On the left-hand corner, as circled by the mouse, there's a 7-foot by 11-foot second-story addition. I'm proposing over a 1-story existing footprint. Total square foot, about 80 square foot. So in this view, it's the existing on top from the east, and the proposed is on the bottom showing the additional, that where he's mousing around, that is the proposed addition. It's to enlarge a bathroom that's in that area, so I could add a laundry. That's the rear view. On top is existing. Yeah, the new stuff, he's mousing around the new proposed. It's about 11 foot wide and 7 foot off the existing rear wall of the second story. That's the view from the west. Same idea. 7 foot off the existing rear wall.
Do you have anything else you want to present to us, or is that it?
No, that's. Is there anything more you need?
We'll find out.
Okay.
So again, so the board understands this. This is not the type of special permit that typically comes to us as a special permit for non-conformities. It's the type of thing that the zoning board would typically see, but because it's in the downtown overlay district, it comes to the planning board rather than the zoning board. And so, are there any questions about the application from the board members?
Yeah. Just a couple of questions. I noticed that there are, at least from what I can see, there are no materials identified on the building elevations. So could you talk a little bit about the existing clapboards, and with the addition, are you intending to match the existing? What are the basic materials that you propose?
Yeah, well, the building is originally 18th century. It was a salt box to start. It turned into a gambrel form in 1767. In 1832, the 2-story shed was added on the east side. All of it's in wood clapboard. All the windows are wood, true divided light. Put true cedar shake on the roof. I intend to match every aspect of what is there now.
Thank you.
Any other questions from members of the board? See anybody? Okay. In that case, I'll open it up for the public hearing. Is anybody from the public who wishes to be heard on this application? I don't see anybody, and we have one person remotely watching, but I'm not up. Okay. So in that case, I'll close the public hearing and suggest that we have a motion to approve special permit for non-conformities as submitted, or any other modification.
And we include the comment about material.
Yeah, so what is that? What would be, why don't you state the motion?
I would add to the motion that materials on the addition will match the existing.
Duly noted.
For a second.
I'll second, Alden.
Thank you. We'll call the roll. Alden,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Jamie,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes.
Richard,
Yes,
and I vote yes also, so you have it. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is the request for a minor modification at 3 Doyle Drive.
So I'm Noel Teresi. I'm speaking for Judy Burke.
Could you speak about?
I'm sorry. I'm Noel Teresi. I'm speaking for Judy Burke, the homeowner.
So I think the closer you speak, I'm sorry for everybody,
Is it
the
worse?
closer you speak to the mics, the easier it is for folks remotely.
Oh, so is that better?
It's better just because it amplifies voices. Thank you.
So we were here last month and we were asked for a better set of plans, which I believe we provided. We also provided letters from all the abutters that they saw the plans and that they approved. I'm not sure if you have the copies of that, but I do have a set of copies that I could ask you.
Yeah.
You all set? Yeah. So it's basically what we had spoken about last week. It's an existing deck. She wants like to close in part of it to turn it into a 3-season room. All the siding and roofing will all match existing to the home now. And the elevations show pretty much everything that we're doing. I don't know if there are any other questions or anything that I can help with.
Do the board members have any questions about this application with new plans?
So just to confirm, you're using the existing concrete footings, and will the supports be changing, or is it the existing deck supports?
No, the existing footings have bare footings that carry the load. The existing beam that you see in that picture where the dog is, the other one will remain as well. So we won't be disturbing the ground.
Any further questions?
only to add, Rick, only to add comment that this is nice to have this level of detail and understanding of the project is a wonderful improvement from the initial sketch that was submitted. So we do appreciate that very much.
Thank you.
There are no further questions or comments from the board. I would like to have a motion to deem this request minor and approve the minor modification request for 3 Doyle Drive with the definitive plan and special permit as requested.
So
Bob makes a motion. Is there a second?
I can second. Richard?
Thank you. Okay, we'll go through the roll call again. Alden.
Yes.
yes.
Jamie.
Yes.
Heather.
Yes.
Richard.
Yes.
And I vote yes also. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
No, that was good. So now we move into other business, talking about the zoning discussion that Andy would like us to consider. So you want to do an introduction?
Sure, thank you. Members, I just wanted to ask, this is for our mention in the last meeting, just wanted to get your thoughts, if you have any in particular, no, that's fine too. But just wanted to get any thoughts you might have on 2 specific areas. The business park, we're looking at trying to make some zoning adjustments there that may help to spur economic development there, a little bit more potential. And so I wanted to, without kind of throw anything out there, just kind of get if you have any thoughts based on what you have out there, what you've seen out there, what you'd like to see out there. If there's anything in particular that that you'd like to see, that you'd like to see change, just so I can keep that in mind as we're thinking about making those adjustments. And I'll refer to the chair. I want to, there's any discussion we have here, that'll be handled. But the other area was just outdoor seating, and the general context behind that one is just that Since the pandemic, there's been outdoor seating, obviously a little bit more expansion on that. I think generally speaking, that's a good thing. It adds to the vibrancy. I'll be downtown, for instance. We have, to be clear, seen that both in some of the parklets that the city council oversees, as well as some of the public spaces like In Street, along the right of way there. And we've also had a few private lots where this has been done, essentially, swapping a few spaces for the outdoor seating. And so the question here, just generally, you don't have to get into the weeds over necessarily, but the question here is, do you have any thoughts or preferences as to how we handle that going forward? The area we're trying to address in the coming months, and we'll do some sort of zoning adjustment, and we've been talking with a few councilors about this to try to work out the kinks, is trying to have something that adequately covers in zoning, the allowance for that, and how that is allowed, particularly here, the public right of way, the city council has jurisdiction over those and can decide where to allow and how many seats. But where they're on private property and they might be taking up parking spaces, for instance, how do we juggle or balance those things? So if there's any flexibility in the parking requirements, or if there's a sort of preferential treatment allowing and encouraging, say, the outdoor seating, in one or more areas of the city. Again, I think primarily the downtown, but generally speaking, where that might be a benefit. Do you have thoughts about that? Do you have any preferences about how we handle that in a zoning amendment? There's been sort of debates about little particulars in there, but we want to have something in the zoning that accommodates and covers that area without leaving it silent. And that's probably through the implication for someone when they have additional seating that can need additional parking under the ordinance. And some folks cannot necessarily provide that. It's a seasonal use, obviously. One might argue that's very heavy season for traffic and so forth, but it's a seasonal use. And where would you like to see that? How much flexibility? Is that just where there's public spaces and or private lots? I do have any preferences as to how that's included, whether it be planning boards.
Let's start with the outdoor seating as our first matter of business. Does anybody have any? I have some thoughts. If anybody had any particular thoughts about how you think we should deal with parking requirements, particularly the parking requirements for outdoor seating?
I personally would advocate for maximum flexibility. In other words, if you increase capacity with outdoor seating, I would not think that we need to increase parking requirements as a result of that. Thank you.
Is there anybody in Zoom land who has any thoughts about this? Let me just say a couple of things that some of this stuff I've communicated to Andy already, and some of it I haven't. I guess one thing I have communicated to Andy is I am one for very, very flexible parking requirements and reducing parking requirements, especially in downtown where we're possible. So I also feel that if you're not doing something on your own property, if you're doing something on public property, there shouldn't necessarily be parking requirements. So if you're taking over a parking space or a piece of a park, you're not. It's not on your property, so zoning really doesn't apply. It's a use of public property. So my sense generally is for the easy one, which is the downtown one, working on a street, I would not impose any parking requirement for that. The more difficult one is where somebody is taking a piece of their parking lot and putting outdoor seating on it, because that's doing two things. It's adding theoretical capacity and reducing available parking spaces. And that's more difficult. So I think that really does belong to the zoning. So I haven't really figured out exactly what that is, but it's not just a matter of adding the parking spaces for the outdoor seating. It's also figuring out what that outdoor seating is doing to the parking that goes for the indoor parking spaces, the spaces away. And actually, I did some research, and it's amazing the variety of ways places deal with this. Some places say we're going to charge the parking for all your outdoor seating, which is sort of one extreme. The other extreme is we're not going to do it. Like Los Angeles, for example, exempts all outdoor dining areas and all unroofed decks and patios from any parking requirements. So that's the other end of it. And in between, there are jurisdictions that have some type of exemption. And with the three that I kind of pulled out, Fairfax County, Virginia, Virginia exempts up to 20 or 32 outdoor seats from parking. So you could have, depending on the size of your restaurant, you could have 20 or 32 outdoor seats and have no parking requirements. Fairfield, Connecticut exempts 400 square feet. Anaheim, California exempts 1,000 square feet. So there's this whole range of things. Like, again, I think we need to look at the kinds of places that we have that might do this. No park lunch is one example, but there might be some, who knows, that the sub shop out at Market Basket Plaza might do it. Yeah, right. Or Giuseppe's too, right? Yeah. So, and Strawberry Down is a different situation because it's not even on the street. It's kind of so I think we probably need to look at all the individual cases for them and figure out what makes most sense for Newburyport. But I would take a position, which I think is really what you're saying, is particularly for putting a parking space and putting tables in it, that we wouldn't charge for parking.
I agree with the same thing. I would support and encourage outdoor dining solutions in general. I think it's a huge plus for the city. And I think in the limited situations where seating might occupy existing parking spaces, I think on a case-by-case basis might be solutions to address that. You can do that all, but depending on what business we're talking about. But I think it's worth looking at what the creative solution might be to ease that out, mitigate the parking. But I would encourage them to have this. I think it's been a huge success.
I think one of the concerns about taking away parking is that you have to have some process, some procedure to allow that in zoning, because right now, if the restaurant has a certain number of seats or a certain amount of square footage, it's required to have a certain number of parking spaces. So if you're taking those spaces away, it either has to go through the zoning board for a variance, or we have to have some type of process where either the city council or the planning board or the zoning board grant a special permit. And that has to be put into the zoning. You can't just do it on the
it's a seasonal use for those spaces. Right. Those temporary.
Right. So we still have to memorialize it.
I would concur specifically with what the chair just said, that I fully support, all the other comments, the other comments about encouraging that proceeding generally, aside from the particulars of debate on the smaller pieces, but I think I certainly agree with that. I just note that, there's maybe perhaps a debate to be had about whether or not we would want to do that by special permit. And I say that mainly because we have found the seasonal nature here, depending on the timings and so forth. Whether or not we want to have a more expedited process by which those would be, but still covering it under zoning. So perhaps it's a review process, but it maybe doesn't, we don't necessarily want it to rise to the level of a special permit that requires a more involved process. And especially given the time frames involved, it may be more problematic to try to mechanically do it as a special permit. So we may want to look through the same process or same review, or same approval process, one or another, but maybe not necessarily with my special permit.
Yeah, something somehow we can put it in there for temporary uses that will allow to.
Right. The other thing I would know too is about the park that's in the public space. The city council reviews, there is already, just to bring it over side of that. If the city council feels that there's an impact that's unreconcilable, it can say no to park that's already receiving or balance it out in some way. So it's not as if there isn't a review process for that type of seating or the impact it may have. That the city council has that jurisdiction. So to me, that doesn't, suggesting a major concern. It's more a question for me about the private lots where there isn't a direct oversight by the city council or some other entity, but we could somehow accommodate or that in zoning.
And well, do you think I guess that's a question, do you think we need to cover in zoning something that doesn't take place in private lots?
I think it's well, maybe sort of considered belt and suspenders, but I think it's preferable here, given that the seating is directly associated with that use of private property. That I agree with your comment about being in the public space, not on the lot. But because that seating is essentially an extension of that use, I think it's belt and suspenders preferable for both the applicants and the operators as well as the city to document, as you have said, formally where there's that. So there isn't any dispute, especially, there's various different businesses doing it. And there's questions about who's allowed to do what. So here there'd be formal recognition.
So we could say in the zoning, specifically say in the zoning that spaces that are permitted by the city council to or the Parks Commission, whichever it is, to operate on public property are specifically exempt from any alternate parking requirements. And then there's no need for any role by the town board of the zoning board. It's just the city council.
Agreed. One non-parking related issue, just in terms of the appearance of these outdoor units, particularly in critical areas in the center of town. The park that's there's a pretty good job this year with creating planters as an edge. Do we? I think those are moving in the right direction. Do we want to say anything about outdoor seating on private property in the downtown district that we would actually like to see what the solution is?
It's a good point. I think, in the public right of way, yeah, I think we would agree, at least depending on what we collectively think. Where we want the review process to be, but again, the city council has some ability to oversee that and make sure it's done properly in the public spaces. But where it's our private property, perhaps we want to put some sort of provision in there that clarifies how that review or accommodation is done, and it is not an unsightly proceeding here, and one that blends the way that the apartments have going on. I think your point. Yeah. So perhaps we put some language or provision in there, if one or another, that compels that to be addressed as part of the outdoor seating, wherever it may be. Thank you for bringing that up.
Are there any other comments about this issue?
Thanks, everybody.
So next issue is the business plan. Do you have that my slide that or the picture that
Oh, my apologies. I can try to pull that up. I'm sorry.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah, sure.
I went through the I1 and I1B districts and just identified all of the different uses that are not typically industrial uses.
You know when that was?
I think it might have been last week. There you go. Business pricing.
Oh, there we go. Thank you.
So this chart, it's maybe a little difficult to see, but these are the I1 district in the light pink and the I1B district in the dark pink. And just kind of going from left to right, you've got two churches. You've got the hopefully future site of Newburyport Youth Services. You've got the charter school, daycare. You've got the Elks, I guess, the function hall, baker space, a brewery, dentist, retail bakery, another brewery, medical offices, two gyms, another brewery, two housing developments, and going down to the bottom of that. So it's a lot of stuff that isn't typical for an industrial park, and so it kind of creates this cluster already. And interesting, I was going back in history, and so 2004 strategic land use plan. One of the recommendations was to create a new transitional zoning district along the south side of Rose Street, Hill Street, Route 1. So we're right there. We've been going a little further there. So it seems, and I started going through the uses, and there does seem to be quite a bit of flexibility of the uses that are allowed, although there are a number of things where I would almost suggest that a special permit be changed to it as a right use. Some of them being medical office, for example, is special permit use, and it could really be just a site plan review. Professional and social services. I would say a lot of uses that are kind of public oriented uses that are special permit uses right now in the ordinance could probably be shifted to as of right. But I would do it in the context of not for the entire I district, but for just those transitional areas, because I think one of the concerns that some of the industrial uses have had is having too many people coming in, too much visitor traffic, and conflicts between truck traffic and walkers and bicyclists and so forth. So I would suggest that we look at kind of building these outlines here into, we don't really have to do it on the right hand side, because that's all we're going to be smart ways just with that. But maybe thinking about that one that's along Low Street, think about creating some kind of transition district there. And do you know, Andy, what the history is between dividing the I-1B from the I-1? Why the uses might be slightly different there?
I know it has to do with going back. I don't know the exact detail, but obviously it required a slight variation back then. But I think as you're aware, there was some resistance from the native folks. There was probably a debate at one point about transitional mixture of uses and the variety. But we've seen that kind of I would say arguably fade in the background a little bit as far as I'm concerned. I think there's still a concern there for some of the folks further into the business part, but well, I don't know the specific answer now. I can certainly look into that a little further. The origins of that. There isn't a whole lot of rationale for me in having that sharp distinction. And I agree with the idea of sort of maybe perhaps working off the center line of the roadways, like Craft Road, for instance, and recognizing that we can have a transitional zone that's really kind of starting to establish itself already. Recognizing that and then making that more consistent and allow it as a transitional zone from the residential walkable 40-yard district eventually to business park, not having just a sharp drop off between mixed use and multifamily to the business park, actually having a transition as well, and sort of recognizing that there's actually already been a fair amount of migration along the Craft Road area where some of that customer oriented businesses.
I guess I'm wondering whether if we were looking at creating a transitional district along the north part of this, whether it makes sense to kind of merge the I-1 and the I-1B, because I don't really get a sense that there's that much difference between them.
I do agree with that entirely. I have to say when I first looked at this in the city, it wasn't apparent looking at the uses there and the ordinance to its convention standards uses equivalent. There really is much need to have a distinction there in that way. However, here I think maybe what we're talking about is the fact that there is maybe a deeper distinction between sort of industrial type uses that people over here, activities where we don't want a whole lot of traffic versus ones that one already have to some degree, and two maybe want as a transition to a walkable, smart road district.
Can I ask a question? Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm having a hard time hearing you guys. So you may have already said this. When you're talking about creating this transitional district, are you talking about only within this red dotted line, or are you just highlighting these as examples of the industries that are already transitioned? Like, are you saying that we would expand it, or are you saying that we would limit it to sort of this footprint already in this thought?
I want to speak for Rick. I think Rick was highlighting what's there already, and I think, and I don't want to speak for Rick, but my sense, and it sounds like Rick maybe is in the same wavelength, is that we're really thinking about it as a corridor or a section as opposed to just restricted to dotted areas, but actually maybe, that piece would extend down Craft Road, maybe extensions of 40-yard district, as opposed to being exclusively within the red dotted areas. I think that what perhaps he was showing is the fact that there's already, complements of some of these uses there already, but one could argue that it should be a continuous, district or section, not just, these blocks that are blocked on here.
Right. I think that I would, without looking very carefully at what the uses are there, and perhaps even talking to some of the property owners, I'd be hesitant to expand the district to include, for example, to take the lumberyard, turn it and have that in the district, that requires, or that is really oriented toward customers. So I think we're toward retail customers. So I mean, there are uses in here that are on the margins, I would say, between public oriented and just wholesale business oriented uses. The Wonder Yard is one. There's a plumbing supply place down on Parker Street. There's Plant Works, which is kind of an office use, but it's also kind of a commercial greenery kind of landscaping place. So these area things that merge. So I would think, I think we need to look at it. I guess that's all I'm trying to say is there are areas that have already changed, where it's pretty, in some ways, pretty easy to say, let's zone it for what's there. And then there are areas that in the middle, which are between the two red outlines, where I don't know what the answer is. I think we need some study to look at. Does that make sense to you, Heather?
It does. My thought is, when you look at this has established itself somewhat organically. Like these businesses have come to these locations for what, needed more space, needed more parking, whatever it might be, or the price was right, and they've chosen to be in this area as opposed to our other areas downtown and whatnot. So my thought is, though, if we create this district, I guess we would be prepared that at some point, like I'm pointing down towards Opportunity Way with my finger. So I'm just saying, like, so organically, some other businesses might cluster in another area of the park. So then would we be like seeing in the future that we would be expanding this transitional area or having pockets in other areas over time, because it may not just grow out of this one section, that the park just may change as needs change. Right?
I guess long term, I guess I didn't see as sort of the near term, maybe the next decade, so to speak, the city would benefit from this sort of transitional. I think to your point, it's very possible long term because we don't know necessarily what's going to be out there decades ahead. There certainly could be more pressure or more need to consider things further in the park. I'm just thinking that in the near term of years or decades, it may not be that pressing or that likely that it's going to expand there, or that we would necessarily want it to expand that far in. So I definitely think you're right that we may eventually want to look at something like that, but I don't necessarily think we're close to that right now for that type of area. I tend to think it's more towards the sort of the northern part or the eastern part of the park generally.
When you say transition, are you talking about use? Like, is it more of a customer focused use? It's something that addresses the street, that talks about setbacks. Are you all still talking about adding different uses to that thing?
Well, I guess I would be thinking about making sure that the uses that have been established over time, however they were established, the schools come in some way, the medical facilities that come in by special permits, the gym probably. I'm not sure how these have come in over time. But I'm thinking that we would want to be thinking about this area as, okay, these are uses that have let in somehow, whether it's by variance or special permit or something else, and they're working. So let's recognize them in the table of uses. Let's look at the coverage requirements, the parking requirements, and I think start thinking about the fact that we're going to be wanting to be serving these uses with sidewalks and bike lanes and that kind of thing. So because you want people coming there, you don't want to necessarily be encouraging them.
You want to connect these sites. I mean, really what we're talking about is a kind of mixed use district within this overall industrial park. And maybe that the balance of the park is more focused on pure industrial uses. Right. But in this particular area, because of its orientation from some of the major streets in this part of town, it makes sense that this have a little bit more flexibility. And that maybe you start to encourage a pedestrian environment, so it's not just individual parts of it, and there's no connectivity between them. So I think I don't think it can be extensive. I think you can create the potential for extension and growth over time. There's only so much energy to all of this, but I think it's a really good idea that low street, wrap, road, intersection to start concentrating more on
Really appreciate your feedback. It's helpful.
Any other thoughts? Yes.
Does the public bus come into any of this currently? Is there a bus stop anywhere?
It doesn't now, but we continue to have ongoing discussions about the routes, and it's obviously a question of how can they expand their service, can they change the route of the service, and how many people are actually taking advantage of it, utilizing the service. Right now, we don't have that strong connection, but maybe to your point, that's something that could help. We could sort of work together with people, to evolve over time. I think it partly depend on us to generate, the demand, and in turn, look for that to try to adjust the routes.
But it makes sense if they're serving the train station and if they're serving the hospital, somehow there could be some kind of link between those areas.
Right, and I think in some ways we're trying. I think maybe we're trying to establish maybe a better linkage between a residential, mixed-use district, transit-oriented district created around the train station, and the employment center and the business park divides, and not having it be just completely isolated, exclusive, uses as we have the, zoning. So,
would you allow multifamily residential in this use?
And that is not on my radar right now. It may be, like Heather said, it may be something long term the city, go to, but I don't necessarily see it on my radar or something that others, in terms of adoption process, that's something that would be palatable right now, or
24/7 environment, sidewalks, and pedestrians. All of that gets reinforced and some really mentioned. So it does have proximity to the brain station where it's right next to it. It was pretty close. For multi-family housing, it's areas like this that make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I can see that as perhaps maybe a longer term or a secondary consideration for current that we mentioned, but it maybe goes to the point here, maybe goes to a little bit of the MBTA, DHCD guidelines we're going to have to be looking at this year and next year, because we will have to look at our 40-yard district according to the state and look at either modifying that or building off of that to have more residential that's allowed, quote unquote, as of right in proximity, and maybe this area is one of those important to your point.
I could imagine that we could be faced at some point in the future with the Elks kind of saying, well, what do we do? A piece of property here, we'd like to move out and then maybe the recreation facility across the street and elderly housing across the street and the train station so close. So there could be a lot of pressure to run one down that point. Yeah. So I think it's something we shouldn't. I think it'd be just remembering when we tried early planning around the train station, the industrial park was so close to the idea of any housing there at all because of the conflicts between industrial uses and the residents, feeling that residents were complaining about the noise and odors from the industrial park. And now we've got housing there, so that's kind of the first foot in the door. Yeah, we can start thinking about
long term.
Just a footnote, really, but we had when the One Boston Way project was being done, we actually had the authority here, commercial use, mitigated, Rico was in that project, and actually resulted in one story being less on the building, less units. I think at the city side, I wouldn't necessarily see that as being a point of conflict, because it was very clear we were trying to establish a residential there, right around the train station. That was actually having the private restriction on the property. Going back, but the bottom line, I guess, is that showed we're doing right now a little bit of tension between, and that's why I think it might be sort of a phased approach, or it might be something we need to sort of wait into not sort of suddenly make drastic changes, but just kind of see incrementally a little bit organic, a little bit more formally via zoning, but organically over time evolving this area, and it might be expedited a little bit by the MBTA communities requirements, A discussion of rezoning this area. But we still might have a few folks in the business park that are concerned about, the type of traffic that could be coming to the park, in the area of the park.
I mean, the way that you're talking about it is higher density in these transitional areas, and then you get to the rest of the industrial park, and it kind of is what it is in terms of density and use and lot coverage. But within those dotted lines, there's kind of in a way very underutilized parcels and higher density mixed uses there.
I think another point, based on just what you said, is that there's been a lot of significant amount of recent reinvestment or new investment in the real part of the industrial park, going along Newburyport and Opportunity Way and so forth. And it hasn't been that much in that northern area. And it's partially, I think it's partially lot configurations, partially wetlands and so forth. But I think this is less likely because of the amount of investment that's happened in some of the real manufacturing facilities in the kind of more western part of the industrial park and business park. They're probably less likely to be looking for different types of uses if they've been doing a lot of investment. I have noticed, as I said, I'm not sure if the map goes down that far, but yeah, actually that last building opposite the end of Newburyport Road, that building right there, there's some non-business type uses in there right now. There's maybe a health facility or something, so that's the kind of transitional, right?
Sure. That one I don't know the origins of the top of my head. There are a few others that we've had there, like you said, it's been a sort of fish management style things with that and whatever by parents and so forth. That one I don't know off the top of my head, but that there has been an evolution over time, just those things. And we haven't necessarily seen, business park property owners coming out and opposing everything, but we have seen them come out and oppose some of these things.
I think it'd be really important to come up with first conceptual draft and then have a meeting of those industrial property owners down in businesses to get their feedback on it, because we certainly don't want to be seen as imposing something on them. They don't like.
Agreed. And actually, one of the things that I'm trying to work with the chamber on is trying to, let's say, reestablish the business park association that kind of has a lot over the last couple of years, but to try to see if we can, bring that group together so we do actually have more or less a unified voice in the business park, what's acceptable, as opposed to having, 100 different, opinions or hard to get their attention and opinions. We used to be able to have sort of a meeting where we were all ready together, and there was a good chunk of the representatives folks. Here we have to try to reestablish that a little bit, because that's kind of missed a lot out there, and sort of get a voice or a meeting together again. It's easier if you have an association. They have
any other thoughts on this?
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. So then the last item on our agenda, last formal item is I should actually say, so approval of minutes. We have the minutes of the very brief meeting on January 18th. Does anybody have any comments or questions or edits for them? I have none. If not, can I have a motion to approve the minutes of January 18th? Thank you.
I'll second it.
Thanks. So I'll do a roll call. Alden.
Yes.
Bob.
Yes.
Jamie.
Yes.
Heather.
Yes.
Richard.
Yes.
And I vote yes also, so the minutes are approved. Okay, updates. Andy.
Just two things, like I said earlier, the MBTA DHD guidelines for MBTA communities, they are requiring us in essence to allow 1,292 units in close proximity, so to speak, to the train station. There's a little flexibility and provisions in there, a little bit more flexibility than the guidelines the DHD had originally issued. So we have a little bit more control and more flexibility, but we'll have to work closely with planning board members. I know Rick and Alden had agreed to kind of part of that sort of working group to start this off, but to put together some options here, we'll have to work closely with the council as well over the next 2 years to adopt zoning pursuant to this housing choice statute and DHCD guidelines to encourage more quote unquote as residential in close proximity to the train station. And we have some flexibility. We're looking up, say, further up Route 1 or even in the Story Avenue area. We have to talk about where we want that to happen and meet the state's requirement, but do so in a way that's sensitive and appropriate. So we're working on that. The other piece I would mention, and the chair was going to mention this as well, was it looks like we're looking at the March 1st meeting to deal with 2 things. One is the planning board membership adjustment, which is both zoning and a general ordinance amendment. Sort of together, it's a zoning piece. We had a joint hearing on the general ordinance with it. And then also, Councilor Capali has sponsored an amendment to the ITIF. And this actually goes back to the 26 August application we saw here today. He was in the last meeting, and we saw some concern from him, and certainly concern from members of the planning board here about granting an ITIF special permit for residential uses downtown, as different, maybe saying more commercial uses. And so he sponsored an amendment. I put together an amendment. He put together an amendment to remove the allowance for residential, but put there for commercial. And I think that's perhaps more consistent with the plan that was looking at here in terms of 2 Market Street, where there's a level of comfort about paying it, decline and utilizing it for commercial uses, but not necessarily creating the problem where we have new residents who are double, booking or counting or using the public spaces, and then essentially displacing the existing residents that park on the residential streets. There isn't necessarily the overnight parking for residential uses in the lots anyway, and it does have, even if you count them in the public spaces, it does create practical reality, which is a lot of park closer to the street, and then you're essentially competing against those who already have that demand in spaces. So this amendment would essentially remove that residential piece, take away the you might even have to have about residential special permits there that allows still the commercial end of that.
That was what I was going to bring up. Anything else that anybody would like to raise before we adjourn the meeting? Not. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Thank you. For a second.
I'll second, Alden.
Okay, just for the final roll call. Alden.
Yes.
Bob. Amy.
Yes.
Heather.
Yes.
Richard.
Yes.
And I vote yes also. And I hope those of you who are recovering at home feel better soon. And families. And anyway.
Yeah, thank you.
Good night.
Right.